Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to be going into Ezekiel, the 5th chapter, which in the 4th chapter, it was basically the Lord had Ezekiel, the prophet, simulate a siege of Jerusalem, okay, by building a replica of the city in a clay tablet and simulating an actual siege, and then also having Ezekiel eat, by measure, drink water by measure daily to represent the famine that the Lord was going to bring into Jerusalem. So the Lord basically had Ezekiel simulate what was actually going to happen to Jerusalem, okay, in the real sense. And continuing in the 5th chapter, the Lord, has him continue in that. So the actions that Ezekiel was doing, these were things that were actually about to, this is a form of prophesying of what was actually about to happen to Jerusalem. Okay, so this is Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 1, Jerusalem's desolation foretold. And thou, son of man, take thee a sharp knife, take thee a barber's razor, and cause it to pass upon thine head and upon thy beard. Then take thee balances to weigh and divide the hair. So basically the Lord told Ezekiel to get a sharp knife and a razor and cut his hair, all right, to shave off his hair and his beard. And he would also get a balance, right, which the balances in the ancient world looked, I'm sure we all know what it looks like, but if we type in ancient world balance scale, you'll see something like this, right? Yeah, or even something like this, where you'll see they had different weights, okay? And then you would have, you drop the weight in one side, obviously. You would also drop whatever it is you're trying to weigh or measure in the other side. And then if maybe the weight was too heavy, then that means that you got to take one of the weights out. Long story short, when you got the two to be at the same level, that would let you know whatever weight this is, that's how much the hair weighs, because you're balancing each other out. That's why it's called a balance. Okay, and then you would know, okay, this is equal to, I don't know, maybe 3 of these or whatever measurements they had used for these things. So Ezekiel was to get a balance, and he was going to basically, as it says here, then take the balances to weigh and divide the hair, okay, basically into 3 parts or 3 portions, as we're going to read on here. Now, a little side story, interesting side story, is a couple of years ago, I came across, I forget exactly what school, I think it was ICGJC or so, but let me just see if it was actually them. ICGJC Israelites. No, not IUIC. Yeah, these guys. I think there might be an ICGJC. But long story short, I came across them, and there was an individual who basically looked like he'd been shaving his beard and all of that. And I guess, I don't know, maybe he was one of their leaders or top guys. So I asked them, because they basically, as I was going, they were like trying to ask me a question. And typically I don't like to engage with them. I just go about my way. There's no point. We have a lot of videos out here, and if they were going to receive the word, it wouldn't be by me stopping by there. They could, Anyway, I said, so what happened to your beard? Isn't it in the law that we're supposed to have our beards and let it grow? And he pulled out, he had to pull out Ezekiel the 5th chapter and the 1st verse, and then said, you see how it says a razor and to cause it to pass on that beard? So yeah, we can shave our beard. What are you talking about? And that's when I said, all right, that's my cue, and time to go. And actually, I remember telling them, I said, I forgot what it was, maybe about the name. And I said, so you're sure? Because they were denying the name of the Lord being Yahweh and Yahweh Shai. And so I said, are you sure? I asked him 3 times, are you sure that that's not the name of the Lord? Because the Lord is going to bring judgment. And they said, yeah. And so I went about my way. But it's just, reading this just brought back to mind that this is the precept they actually tried to use to justify shaving their beards, which in the law it tells you that you're not supposed to mar your beard and so on and so forth. Obviously, in these situations, this is a particular situation, right? Similar to when you have somebody that completes a vow, and then you'd have to shave off your hair, or even when you're mourning, right? You'd have to shave off. So these are like a part of maybe some protocol. But in this case, the Lord specifically asked Ezekiel to do this for a specific purpose, to foreshadow what was actually gonna happen to Jerusalem using this. So this is not a valid precept to use and say, hey, this means you can go and shave your beard. But anyway, the Lord tells Ezekiel, this is what I want you to do. So he shaves his hair. He has the balances. He divided it up. Verse 2, thou shalt burn with fire a third part in the midst of the city. So a third part, meaning that he has divided the hair into 3 parts, right? So 1/3 of that hair, he was going to burn it in the midst of the city. Now, in the 4th chapter, like I said, the Lord told him to design the city of Jerusalem within a clay tablet. So he was gonna take this hair and then burn it in the midst of that simulation, that little city that he built. It says when the days of the siege are fulfilled, meaning that he had to remember that he had to in the 4th chapter it said, where are we at? One second, let's see if we can find it. There's a part in here that made mention to, there we go, Ezekiel 4:8. It says, and behold, I will lay bands upon thee, and thou shalt not turn thee from one side to another till thou hast ended the days of thy siege. So remember that Ezekiel was laying on his side. He had to lay on the left side for a period of time, lay on the right side for a period of time, and he couldn't move. And it says until he had ended the days of his siege. So here, going back into the 5th chapter, the Lord says, okay, now I want you to take your hair, cut it up into 3 parts, and at the end of the days of the siege, when they're fulfilled, you're going to take a third of that hair, right? You're going to put it in the midst of the city, and you're going to burn it. And this represented what actually happened in real life, because I believe the siege of Jerusalem, they put it anywhere between 18 to 30 months. 30 months would be a little over 2 years, about 2.5 years or so. And so after the Babylonians had besieged Jerusalem for X amount of years, they finally were able to break through. They burnt the city. And thou shalt take a third part and smite about it with a knife, and a third part thou shalt scatter in the wind, and I will draw out a sword after them. So a third part you're going to burn in the midst of the city, a third part you're going to cut up with a knife, and the third part you're gonna scatter into the wind. Verse 3. And remember, this is all symbolic to represent something. That's why the Lord is telling Ezekiel to do this. Thou shalt also take thereof a few in number, and bind them in thy skirts. So you're going to take a little bit of hair, and you're going to tie it up in your garment. Then take of them again, and cast them into the midst of the fire. Then you're going to take those little hairs, and you're going to throw it into the fire that you had set in the midst of the city, and burn them in the fire. For thereof shall a fire come forth into all the house of Israel. Once again, simulating the real life event that was going to take place during the siege and after the siege. Thus saith the Lord God, this is Jerusalem. I have set it in the midst of the nations and countries that are round about her. And when you actually look at Jerusalem, Jerusalem is surrounded by pretty much all of these nations. right? If you look south of Jerusalem, you have the nation of Edom. If you look a bit more southwest, you have the nation of Egypt. If you look even further south, you also have Ishmael, right? And on the east you have Ammon, and also on the east you have Moab, and then on the north you have Aram or Syria, and then further east you have Assyria. Further east you have the Babylonians. Further east you have Elam. So literally, where Israel was in the midst of these nations that are round about. Verse 6, and she hath changed my judgments into wickedness more than the nations, and my statutes more than the countries that are round about her. For they have refused my judgments and my statutes, and have not walked in them. And here when it says judgments, it means the ordinances of the Lord, right? The laws, the proper ways that we've been instructed to live by. They have changed those into wickedness. So as where the law says you're supposed to do this and treat people this way, and for the widows this is supposed to happen, they've changed that and they're doing other things. The law says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. They set up idols. They set up groves. They sacrifice their children to other gods. So this is what the Lord is talking about. And then it says more than the nations, meaning that you remember that before the Lord took us into the promised land to drive out the Canaanites, he specifically said by the mouth of Moses and established with Joshua, said when you go, you're supposed to basically get all of the, it's funny, right? Maybe Netanyahu should have used that. He should have used that precept in there instead of trying to say that the H people are Amalek. But anyway, the Lord said, go and basically drive them out completely, and do not after their ways. Don't live after the ways of the heathens that are round about you. Don't pick up their customs and don't pick up their ways. So actually, a lot of the laws, a good portion of them that the Lord says, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. These were actually certain things that the heathens were doing, a part of their customs and practices. And the Lord explicitly said, don't do this. I am deliberately making you separate from them. You're not allowed to do this. In fact, here are a set of rules and laws and judgments. That is what you have to do. They got into the land. Lo and behold, this is what we're reading. That they changed those judgments into wickedness more than the nations. That means they learned these wicked ways and they took it to a whole nother level. More so than even the nations they learned it from. It says, in my statutes more than the countries that are round about her. For they have, so if you were to compare the level of wickedness when it comes to disobedience between the law of the Lord and and Israelites, between Israelites and these heathens, that's why the Lord said, look, he even told Ezekiel, he said, look, I'm not sending you to a country of a strange speech, of a hard language that you don't understand. But guess what? Even if I sent you there, they would have listened. But your own people, they're so stiff-necked and impudent, they don't even respect me. Okay? And it says here, for they have refused my judgments and my statutes, they have not walked in them. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, Yahweh, because ye have multiplied more than the nations that are round about you, and have not walked in my statutes, neither have kept my judgments, neither have done according to the judgments of the nations that are round about you. Meaning, they multiplied more in wickedness, okay, than the nations that are round about them. They didn't walk in the ways and the ordinances that the Lord set them up to do, even though he sent prophets and messengers to warn them, to say, because sometimes the Lord will send a prophet basically as like a guiding stick to say, yo, you guys are going off way too far. Remember the agreement you had with the Lord. Turn back. You're going the wrong way. And they didn't listen, so they kept on going the wrong way. Neither have they kept my judgments, neither have they done according to the judgments of the nations that are round about you. Basically meaning that you've gone so far, you didn't even live up, like adhere to the restrictions that even these other nations have, meaning you surpassed them. Okay, when you actually read this and you look at the different translations as well, you'll basically get the sense that the Lord is saying these people are so bad. They learned the ways of the heathens, and they didn't even stop at the boundaries. Because even these heathens, okay, their wickedness has some level to it. But these people, they've done according they haven't even done according to those judgments. They just went above and beyond. They went on Buzz Lightyear mode to infinity and beyond. Verse 8, therefore thus saith the Lord Yahweh, behold, and I keep saying Yahweh because actually when you look up, when you see the word God in all caps, same way if you see the word Lord in all caps, they actually have in the Hebrew, it's actually Yahweh. That's translated that way. Okay, and not looking at this pseudo transliteration or pronunciation, the actual pronunciation of the Hebrew characters here is a Yah, Ha, Wa, Ha. However, the Wa and the Ha at the end are joined. Okay, they're connected. So instead of Yah, Ha, Wa, Ha, you drop the A at the end of the last Ha, and you're left with Yahweh. Okay, so that's the name there that they've translated as God in all capital. And it's not Jehovah or Yehovah. That's not Hebrew. So it says here, verse 8, therefore thus saith the Lord Yahweh, behold, I, even I, am against thee, and I will execute judgments in the midst of thee in the sight of the nations. Meaning I'm gonna, now I'm pissed off. Now I'm not looking to do good for you. Now I'm gonna bring judgment upon you. And even the nations that are all around you, they're gonna see it. And I will do in thee that which I have not done, and whereunto I will not do any more the like, because of all thine abominations. Now what this means is this is just basically the Lord was putting emphasis on the level of destruction he was gonna bring. You know, meaning like the way I'm gonna damage you is gonna be so bad. You've never seen this before, and you will never see it after. Because if you were to take this in a literal sense, you might say, well, wait, the Lord kind of did this again when the Romans came and besieged Jerusalem. It was also a siege by a foreign nation. There was also famines, and they set the city on fire, and they destroyed the temple, and they took us captives. That's kind of like the same thing that happened here. Okay, but this is more to put emphasis on how bad it's going to be. Meaning you've never seen anything like this before. And it's going to be so bad that ain't nothing going to compare to this. But in this case, it's to put emphasis on that. Verse 10, therefore the fathers shall eat the sons in the midst of thee, and the sons shall eat their fathers. And I will execute judgments in thee, and the whole remnant of thee, and the whole remnant of thee will I scatter into all the winds. And this is actually also in the law. When you actually read the law in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, this is actually in there. That the parents were going to eat the children in the midst of the siege. They weren't going to share. Their eye was going to be evil towards their brother. And this happened. Because in a siege, what ends up happening, I mean, the whole concept of a siege is who's going to break first. And most of the time, when a nation came to besiege another nation, they understood this can go on for a long period. This is like a game of chicken or a game of waiting. So we need to come prepared. The good thing is, with the nation that's besieging the other one, the attackers, they can gain resources and replenishments from outside because they're the ones that are out surrounding the city. The ones that are trapped inside, however, they have limited resources. And once those resources run out, then it starts to become hell. Because now you can't go outside, nothing can come inside, you got no food inside, what are you eating? And eventually you get hungry enough, they start to eat themselves. Okay, and that's where you have cannibalism. So, as the Lord is saying here, this is a part of the judgments I'm going to bring upon you, that you're going to eat each other. It says here, and scatter, and execute judgments in thee, and the whole remnant of thee will I scatter into all the winds. So a portion of you are going to be taken captives, a portion of you are going to flee, okay, but I'm going to basically scatter you. Wherefore, as I live, saith the Lord Yahweh, Surely because thou hast defiled my sanctuary with all thy detestable things and with all thine abominations, therefore will I also diminish thee. Neither shall mine eye spare, neither will I have any pity. Because you didn't have any pity when you were doing all this wickedness. And now you've driven me to the point, you've provoked me to the point where I'm angry. And now I'm going to bring judgment. So don't expect any mercy. And when you actually read about the accounts of the things that happened, it was bad. It was bad, but the Lord said it was going to happen. Verse 12, a third part of thee shall die with the pestilence, and with famine shall they be consumed in the midst of thee. And a third part shall fall by the sword round about thee. And I will scatter a third part into all the winds, and I will draw out a sword after them. Okay, so and basically when you actually read the actual account of what happened, these things took place. I think there's one here in here. Let's see, there's something else that I want to find and read. Okay, we'll come back to those resources there. But let's keep on reading for now. Verse 13, thus shall mine anger be accomplished, and I will cause my fury to rest upon them. And I will be comforted, and they shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken it in my zeal, when I have accomplished my fury in them. And in his zeal, meaning he's hot right now. He's pissed. Okay, so that's why he's saying, he's speaking so harshly. And he says, I'm going to be satisfied after I do this to them. It's like somebody that's very, very, very angry, and they just have to let it out. And once they're done, they take that sigh of like, all right, now I'm better. I've been able to release that. But that's how the Lord is feeling. Verse 14, moreover, I will make thee waste and a reproach among the nations that are round about thee, in the sight of all that pass by. Because after the destruction that was going to come upon Jerusalem, remember, you still had the Moabites and Ammonites and Edomites and so on and so forth round about, and they would see it. And they would look down at the glory of Jerusalem. Wasn't that the nation that God was at? The so-called holy people, they think they're better than everybody. Look at them. That's crazy. Verse 15. So it shall be a reproach and a taunt and an instruction and an astonishment unto the nations that are round about thee, when I shall execute judgments in thee in anger and in fury and in furious rebukes. I, the Lord, have spoken it. So these nations are going to see it, and it's going to look reproachful. But it's also going to be as an instruction. They're going to see the chastisement the Lord is going to bring upon you. Verse 16, when I shall send upon them the evil arrows of famine, which shall be for their destruction, and which I will send to destroy you, and I will increase the famine upon you, and I will break your staff of bread, which the Lord also made mention of in Ezekiel 4. So will I send upon you famine and evil beasts, and they shall bereave thee. When you look up the word bereave, meaning they're going to make you childless, right? They're going to be killing you and your children. And pestilence and blood shall pass through thee, and I will bring the sword upon thee. I, the Lord Yahweh, have spoken it. So this was the judgment that the Lord was pronouncing against Jerusalem. And he was telling Ezekiel, do this, do that, do this. This is gonna represent this. Yeah, this part of their hair, this third part is gonna represent how I'm gonna scatter them, how they're gonna flee, how the sword is gonna be after them. This part is gonna represent how I'm gonna set the city on fire. Like, I'm gonna really bring some heavy judgment upon them because of their wickedness. And then they're gonna understand why it is that I've done this. And everybody's gonna bear witness to it. Okay? So now let's read, I have here 2 Chronicles 36, and I'm going to start at 14. Moreover, all the chief of the priests and the people transgressed very much after all the abominations of the heathen, and polluted the house of the Lord which he had hallowed in Jerusalem. And is that not what we read in Ezekiel the 5th chapter? That's what the Lord was saying. right? He was saying that these guys, they've right here, they've multiplied more than the nations that were round about them. They've not walked in the Lord's statutes. And that's what we're reading of here. All right, they polluted the house of the Lord, which he had hallowed in Jerusalem. And the Lord God of their fathers sent to them by his messengers, rising up betimes, meaning rising up early, and sending, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. So the Lord saw this wickedness that was going on. He knew what it would lead to. It would provoke him onto anger. So he sent the prophets to go and warn them and say, hey, stop, you're going to piss me off, stop. But they mocked the messengers of God and despised his words and misused his prophets until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people till there was no remedy. So it's like if somebody is provoking you, like imagine you're sitting there, somebody's like using their finger to like come right into your face, poke the side of your face, try to like meddle with your ears, like they're just annoying you. And you're telling them, stop. I said, stop, you're gonna piss me off. That action of you saying stop, the equivalent of that is when the Lord sends these prophets, right? To let you know, you need to stop. This is your last warning. And in return, they mock the messengers of God. That's like if the person you're telling to stop, you say stop, and they're like, stop. But what you gonna do? Huh? Stop what? I ain't gonna stop. I ain't stopping nothing. What? I'm scared of you now. So imagine you're getting ready to knock this person back into 3 weeks ago, and you're telling them stop because you don't want to have to do this, but this is the reply they're giving you. Until you get so pissed off that you're just about ready to risk it all. Okay, that's pretty much what they were doing. Verse 17, therefore he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, which was Nebuchadnezzar, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old man, or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand. Him that stooped for age, meaning, you know, when people are very old, they need that cane and they sort of look hunchback, like they're bent over because they're very old. Your spine is not strong enough to really keep you upright for long. And all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king, and of all his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. And they burnt the house of God, and brake down the wall of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. Well, guess what? That's what the Lord, everything we're reading of in Ezekiel chapter 5 hasn't actually happened yet. In Ezekiel 5, this hasn't actually happened to Jerusalem yet. In 2 Chronicles 36, this is an account of what happened to them. So the Lord is telling Ezekiel, and this is a foreshadowing, and it actually took place a little bit after this. Okay, but as he told him, where was it? Verse 4, then take of them again and cast them into the midst of the fire and burn them in the fire, speaking of the hair, for thereof shall a fire come forth into all the house of Israel. The Lord said that, right? And I think later on he said that he would send a fire upon them. Or maybe that was just that part over there. Okay, where are we? Verse 20, and them that had escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia. Okay, there you go. So that's an account right there. And lastly, I just want to read this here about the siege of Jerusalem, so you can get a secular account of what we actually read in the book of Ezekiel. So it says here, Nebuchadnezzar began a siege of Jerusalem in January 589 BC. Many Jews fled to surrounding Moab, Ammon, Edom, and other countries to seek refuge. Now keep in mind, what did the Lord say? He said, scatter a third part of your hair into the wind, because he was going to scatter Israelites. He was going to scatter them, the remnants. Okay, and a part of that was by some of them actually fleeing, and a part of that was by some of them being taken captive. The Bible describes the city as enduring horrible deprivation during the siege. An example here is 2 Kings 25:3. Let's actually pull that up. 2 Kings 25. Here we go. 2 Kings 25:1. And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his host, against Jerusalem, and pitched against it, and they built forts against it round about. Now, when you go to Ezekiel chapter 4, is that not what the Lord told Ezekiel to do? Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 1, Thou also, son of man, take thee a tile, and lay it before thee, and portray upon it the city, even Jerusalem, and lay siege against it, and build a fort against it, and cast a mount against it, and set the camp also against it, and set battering rams against it round about. That was Ezekiel simulating the siege that we're reading about here in 2 Kings 25. When Nebuchadnezzar actually came there, and he and all his hosts against Jerusalem, and pitched against it, and they built forts against it round about. Verse 2, And the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And on the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine prevailed in the city, and there was no bread for the people of the land. Well, going back to Ezekiel chapter 5, did not the Lord say that he was going to do this to them? All right, let's go down to Ezekiel chapter 5, and verse 10 talks about cannibalism. Why? Because of the lack of bread. Verse 12, the Lord mentions here, a third part shall die with pestilence, and with famine shall they be consumed in the midst of thee. But more explicitly, the Lord says here in verse 16, When I shall send upon them the evil arrows of famine, which shall be for their destruction, and which I will send to destroy you, and I will increase the famine upon you, and will break your staff of bread. Guess what? When the time came, during that siege, 2 Kings 25:3, and on the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine prevailed in the city, and there was no bread for the people of the land. And the city was broken up, and all the men of war fled by night, by the way of the gate between two walls, which is by the king's garden. Now the Chaldees were against the city round about, because that's what you do in a siege. And the king went the way toward the plain. So guess what? The king, which was Zedekiah, he tried to run. During the siege, he tried to flee. And he went towards the plain. And guess what happened? And the army of the Chaldees pursued after the king, Zedekiah, and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army were scattered from him. So they took the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon to Riblah, and they gave judgment upon him. And they slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him with fetters of brass, and carried him to Babylon. So he tried to run. The Lord said, no. So the Babylonians caught him, his army deserted him, they killed his sons in front of him, they took out his eyeballs, and then they basically shackled him up and took him as a prisoner to Babylon, where he ended up dying over there. And that's pretty much it for Ezekiel, the 5th chapter. So yeah, overall, this was the Lord having Ezekiel continue to simulate, this time a bit more detailed, what the destruction of Jerusalem that the Lord was going to bring, what it was going to look like. And I just showed a few examples of how what Ezekiel portrayed actually ended up taking place. So with that, Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Racha, Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.